Good morning, everyone. My name is Doug Hagelund. I am the CTO at Trace Register. I put my email up here, dhagelund@traceregister.com. Should you have some questions for me or comments, please don't hesitate, contact me there. I'm very excited about talking to you today about full chain traceability. 4 years ago, we started exploring why full chain traceability was so hard. Today, I want to share with you our findings and the solutions that we found. What is full chain traceability? And I'm using the acronym FCT. Well, it's basically the full history of the product from beginning to end. So if you are enjoying a nice seafood dinner, you can then get the history all the way to it when it was harvested. There's a lot of interest in full chain traceability. A simple Google search shows about 12.8 million. If you narrow it down into seafood, you will see about 500,000 to 1 million results on that. So who's driving all this? Well, first it's the consumer. The consumer wants to have a dialogue to understand, is it fresh? Is it sustainable? Is it wild, farmed, antibiotics, etc.? Another group driving it is the regulatory. The EU is very active in this. In the US, we have the SIMP filings, catch documents, etc. And regulatories seem to have quite an appetite for more data. In the middle is the business. They are facing, I need data from my buyer. I need to manage risk. Marketing wants the data. And also, there's a new development on the horizon. In April of 2019, the FDA announced that a new era of smarter food safety, and they stated that the FDA plans to leverage technology and other tools to create a more digital, traceable, and safer food system. So full chain traceability data is in essence the third leg of the product. You have your product itself, the packaging, and then the data about that product and the history of that. So why is there so much interest in it? Who is using full chain traceability data and what are they using it for? Let me show some examples on it. It's a long list. And one thing we hear is that having full chain traceability data about a specific seafood item in the counter makes it easier to train the personnel behind the counter to answer those questions. Other studies have shown that a consumer is willing to pay up to 10% more for traceable products. So companies are using FCT data to help them differentiate their products and get a better price. Importers are using it to assist with the broker filings to help speed and decrease the cost of that activity. Others see it as a vital component for managing recalls. Yet other companies see FCT data as a resource to reduce costs by catching problems earlier. So it's a long list and it's growing. So why, in reality, don't we have it fully out there? So what are the barriers to it? Well, I think there are principally, the first barrier is that it's a global industry. When you look at a supply chain for seafood, it's not a nice linear graph. It looks more like a web. It also moves extremely fast. This afternoon, I'm having some salmon that was caught yesterday in Alaska. Both the physical product and the digital data moves very fast. The other part is the growth in data. I'm showing here the number of KDEs versus the year. KDE stand for Key Data Element. If you are familiar with Trace Register, you probably have heard the term attribute. They're synonymous. 10 years ago, we had maybe a handful of these. So examples could be the market name, a scientific name, a catching method, a country of origin. Today, that number has grown to over a couple of hundred. That represents a 50 to 60% annual growth rate. We're not seeing any indication that this is going to slow down. The second part of this is also the amount of documentation. We see data coming in, and 10 years ago, we saw 1 or 2 documents per container or per a shipment. Today, that can be in the hundreds, if not the thousands. The other part we're seeing is the silos of data. Data, the same data, exists in a large variation of different formats. And it's very hard to make this data or these silos talk to each other. An example of a silo could be an ERP system. The other is the large number of portals that are now emerging. I spoke with one person. He told me that he had to enter the same full chain traceability data into 10 to 20 different portals. Great for the buyer. They get their data in the format they want. Horribly expensive and time consuming for the provider. So what are some of the symptoms that we're seeing with this? Well, the first we are seeing is the file rooms are basically filling up with paperwork. The other thing we are seeing is extremely complicated Excel spreadsheet. One person told me it was like he's living in Excel hell. Now, the other thing is the inboxes, the emails. I remember I was visiting with one person. We were having a conversation in his office, and every 30 seconds I kept hearing this ping. And being the inquisitive person that I am, I finally, after 2 minutes, asked him what it was. And he said, well, every time I get a new email, my computer makes that sound. I get 500 emails per day. My job is to take the email, save the attachments from the email, put them in the right folder on SharePoint, print it out, put it in the filing cabinet. And he basically turned around and looked at me and said, Doug, I need help. So that was about 4 years ago. We went back and I started looking at this and saying, okay, what is the root cause to this? And as we looked at this, we had the silos of data, we had the global and the speed of the data, and we had this growth both in KDEs and documents, i.e. data volumes. So we have a large variety of data moving very fast, and we have a very high volume of data. In 2001, Gartner's group identified these as the 3 V's of big data. So one of the key points here is that what we have struggled with in the traditional implementation is we have tried to take a traditional approach to solving a big data problem. For example, most existing, even specialized traceability software systems use and rely on KDs, these key data elements. Where Trace Register, there's over 320 of these, and they keep just growing every year. What we need, and what we found, we need to be able to structure this. There's something about the product, there's something about location, there's some lot data, there's some dynamic data, there's logistical data, there's trading partner data. So we took this analysis and we sat back and said, okay, what technologies are needed to make this truly practical? So what we found was that there are 7 pillars of technology that was needed. The first one is the product identifier. We need to know and be globally able to identify the product that we're looking to identify the history about. The CTEs is the critical tracking event. So we needed to reshape that. We also needed standards such as the Global Dialogue on Seafood Traceability, GS1. We needed the concept of linked data. We needed blockchain. We needed master data. And we needed the concept that GS1 now has with digital links. All of these 7 technologies came together and really made full chain traceability practical. Now, the rest of the talk, I want to show you how these 7 pillars of technologies come together to make it practical. There is a little bit of geek, but I try to keep it a minimum. When I dive into the geekiness, I'm going to show you that icon. Ignore it if you're not interested in it, but just a little step there. The first step we talked about is linked data. So the subject, this fish, and I have some information about that fish. Let's call it the product information. So linked data is a concept that came about in the early 2000s, part of the semantic web. It's a way for me to describe a relationship or a link type between a subject and an object. So little geek speak, if I have a global trade item number here, I can have a link type, a GS1 product information or GS1 PIP. It gives me a web address where I can then go and find that. The second pillar is the master data. Master data is kind of like a trade item definition or a product definition. It is data about this type of product. It's identified using a global trade item number or a G10. So we might say it's black caviar in a 2-ounce container, and it's lumpfish and a product of Norway. The other part is the supply chain entity. There's a lot of discussion around that. Some people want to call it just a location. Challenge there was location was kind of an address. So what we're talking about is what is at that address. Is it a factory? In this case, I'm illustrating a vessel. And that is identified using a global location number. Now, to associate with that, it's also important to see that there are documents and certifications that kind of supporting documents and supporting certifications about both the product definition and the supply chain entity. So those, as we talked earlier on the link data, we are now able to link documented certifications to a product definition, to a supply chain entity or a location. The third pillar is the critical tracking event. We call it the 5 W's, the who, what, when, where, and why. Every event has those 5 W's. Some of them are going to have additional, like I'm showing here, for example, a fishing event, a receive event, a processing event, and a move event. The fishing event might have the fishing area. It might have a fishing method. Also important, attachments like document certificates, like a catch certificate, a fishing permit, may be linked to each event. So what we're doing, we're using these events to give the context of the KDEs. We're grouping them together to do that. So what we found that when you just have the KDEs, you lose that context. Like if you have a KDE says warehouse, well, was the product moved into the warehouse? Was it moved out of the warehouse? What was the time it did? By using events to describe the move event, all of that, all those KDEs now get a context. So one thing we have found is that a pure KDE approach that we had used in the past does not work when you're trying to make full chain traceability practical. This next part is the what. This is the product instance identifier. Not all fish comes with a barcode, so we need to kind of be able to identify it. And what we're talking about here is the product type, i.e. this is a salmon, and a lot number, maybe it was caught yesterday. So since we're dealing with computers here, I'm going to warn a little bit here on geek speak. We're calling this an electronic product code or an EPC. It's a product class, the type of the product, and we're talking about a product class instance, like a lot number or a serial number. We put these two together, product class per product instance, we get the EPC. If you think about it in terms of a book, there might be millions of books out there with a specific ISBN number. The ISBN is the product class. The fact that I'm talking about my book, the book I purchased, I put my name in it, that is the product instance. So having the ISBN plus knowing that it's my book, I can talk of that specific instance of that book. So if you look on the left, we have a product class, a product instance, and together they give us the EPC, i.e. the product instance identifier. The remaining 4 of the CT is the who, where, when, and why. The who is the owner of the product at the time of the event. And we represent that with a party GLN or a PGLN. Next, the where. Where did the event take place? The farm, the factory, the vessel, the dock, etc. That is represented with a GLN. The when is the time, and the why is the type of event. Now, the next pillar that we realized we needed was interoperability. And we see that because, the full history is made out of many pieces. And we're going to have many different traceability systems needing to talk to each other. We see it, we have been in this, lots of experience for over 15 years, and there's this need to exchange data. In essence, full chain traceability is, from an IT perspective, full chain data integration. So in order to achieve that, we need to agree on the protocols, i.e. do we send an email, etc., or do we do a web call? We need to agree on the message format. Am I going to say you a JSON file, an XML file, an Excel spreadsheet, or a CSV? And we need to agree on the language. And we call it the ontology, so that we have a clear, crisp, succinct understanding of each of those data elements. Luckily for us, that is where Global Dialogue on Seafood Traceability, GDST, and GS1 already have developed standards around this protocol that are already in use. GDST is in the process of releasing the extensions or and recommendations to make GS1 work really well for the seafood industry. Now, interoperability does come at a cost. And the biggest cost there is trust. As we're moving down the supply chain, every link in the supply chain adds another tile or other information to it. If you have different systems here, how do you know if somebody changed some data? Here I'm picking on the dock. Maybe they made an error and got the wrong scientific name. How can you know? Do you have to trust all of those? And here is where the blockchain comes in. Blockchain is a beautiful technology and really allows us to solve the trust issue. We're not advocating it for data sharing. We're advocating it for what it's really good at, to distributed trust. So how does it do it? Well, every time a tile is sent, a fingerprint of that is registered on the blockchain. A new tile is added, you take a fingerprint of the previous, plus a fingerprint on the new one, and you add that new fingerprint on the blockchain, etc., etc. So if somebody made a mistake and got the wrong scientific name, anyone could then take that data they received and compare it to the signature on the blockchain and know that, oops, something is wrong with this one tile. They will not tell them, like, what is wrong? The data is not stored on the blockchain, only the fingerprint. So let's look at an example. Here is a farm example. You're starting out with a stocking event from a hatchery. Then you have a feed event. Then you have a harvest event. That data then flows to the first receive at the processor. It is transformed, it's packaged, it's shipped, and it then goes to here we made it simple, goes to a retailer, and then it goes from the retailer to Alice. Typically, we see the recording of the events. And what's important here is we're recording the history as events, so we are just filling in the 5 W's, who, where, when, why. So that is very achievable on a very simple mobile app. The information that's exchanged is an advanced shipment notification, which is a way of saying a fancy packing list. And that's already done quite in EDI today between many companies. And in the middle here, typically events are recording using scanners, smartphone, web apps, or open APIs. Again, it goes to the retailer through an advanced shipment notification, and then is sold to Alice. And you may wonder right now, how is it that we can exchange traceability data just by sending an advanced shipment notification? Well, the key here lies in the 7 pillar. Here's the EPC code here. Remember, that's the thing that identified that instance. This is my book. And the way that works is the digital link. You're taking out the ASN to full chain traceability data. So there is a little bit of computer speak here, but I think you will follow along. So given this, we can now take this, and from this EPC, we can extract what's called a G10. And that G10 we can send to id.gs1.org, and this is called a resolver. He will give us a list of other computers that has information about that specific G10. So in this case, let's say he says it's TR, has that information. So now I have the address of the TR. I can now start asking questions. Remember, number one, we talked about linked data. I can now ask about traceability data for that EPC code, and I can get the full history here. Next week, you will hear kind of more about the details around that. I can get the product information, and I can get all the location data. So just by exchanging that and using the GS1 digital links and the responsible resolver combined with the linked data, we are now able to minimize the data that's exchanged and using linked data to obtain it. What's even more beautiful about that is a consumer with a GS1 enabled smartphone app can now do exactly the same thing and get the traceability data, thereby connecting the consumer with your product, promising increased brand loyalty, increased revenue. And even more important, enabling the brand owner to have a dialogue with the end consumer. So the 7 parts, product identifier, the critical tracking events, the standards, the linked data, the blockchain, and the master data, and the GS1 digital links come together to make a practical full chain traceability solution. So in summary, new technologies have enabled a new methodology for full chain traceability. Digital links make sharing FCT data easy. You're just sharing a packing list. Seamlessly handles the management of document and certificates. Documents are now a first-class citizen in full chain traceability. They are directly linked to what they support, be it a master data, such as a G10, a product definition, or a supply chain entity, or an event. Critical tracking events add context to key data elements. GDST and GS1 provide standards that enable a fully interoperable FCT solution, and the FCT methodology makes full chain traceability a practical reality. So I wanted to also share with you some references here where you can find out more about those.
All right, well, thank you everybody for attending.